Hey everyone, today I've mostly been in the sunshine, having to keep an eye on my little dog who keeps trying to escape the front garden by by digging holes under the fence. So he's pretty needy most of the time, so I'm not entirely sure why he wants to escape. But here we are, quarantine has made a mockery of us all. So it's been a while since we last looked at Beowulf, so today we are actually going to finish off our study on Beowulf. So getting right into it, the final part of the story picks up with Beowulf maybe 50 years later, and he's shown as an older man, a king himself in like his 70s or 80s. But before we get on to discussing Beowulf himself, think about this. What purpose do dragons have in fantasy novels? Well, if you think about it, dragons are just about the biggest, most powerful creatures in the fantasy genre. Certainly they're the most famous ones. So simply put, if putting a dragon into the story is kind of your big final sequence, it's a promise that the dragon is going to be kind of the strongest thing in the story. So unless demons or gods appear, if your enemy is a dragon, the point is being made that you have got an impossible task ahead of you. And what we are going to find out is that as we go in to this final part of Beowulf, he's in his twilight years and he is going to meet his toughest opponent yet, and it is going to come in the form of a dragon. And it's possible that the dragon was actually selected as his final nemesis to show how strong Beowulf is, even as an elderly man in his 70s or 80s. Can you imagine that? But that also Beowulf himself can only actually be defeated by the strongest, most ferocious character in like the fantasy world's roster. Oh, I'm sorry for the spoiler, everyone. Beowulf does actually die in this chapter. I'm very, very sorry to ruin it for you. So going forward, the tone of this final part of the poem is very different to the rest of the poem. It's dark. A lot of time in it is devoted to Beowulf thinking about his life story at this point, possibly to indicate that he knows his life is soon going to be over. So Beowulf has reigned over a peaceful kingdom for what we know to be about half a century, and he's been a good king. But now, towards the end of his life, a dragon begins to wreak havoc on his people, causing Beowulf to reflect on what has happened so far in his reign and causing him to think negatively about what he might have done to make God punish him in this way. What parallels are drawn between Beowulf and Hrothgar in the final part of the story? So some possible answers are that both kings, when we met Hrothgar and now Beowulf, are in the final stages of their careers. They're both grey, they're less agile, their limbs don't move so well, they're less likely to be able to do their own fighting, although this apparently doesn't bother Beowulf. And another spoiler alert, they are both saved by a young hero who's going to assist them and end up being bequeathed a portion of their treasure. Earlier on, Hrothgar gave Beowulf his treasure. That's going to happen again. So the story goes on to say that Beowulf himself, actually, it's not his fault that the dragon has come. He hasn't done anything to bring about this dragon's wrath. In fact, it's made explicit that it was someone else's fault. So the dragon had lain dormant, protecting his wealth of treasure, and that was then found by a runaway slave. And the slave took a piece of the treasure for his master in the hope that his master would forgive him for running away, which he did. But then the cruel and greedy slave owner decides he doesn't just want this one piece of treasure. He's going to go back and he's going to get the rest of the treasure from this dragon's lair. Now, when he goes back with more men, this wakes the dragon from his slumber. And then after this, night after night, the dragon would burn down people and houses with his fiery, poisonous breath. Now, Beowulf, as we know, he likes to get his hands dirty, so even though he's an elderly man, he recruits 11 of his best men and he says, "You're going to come with me to this dragon's lair to defeat him once and for all." So that's obviously where the similarities between Hrothgar and Beowulf end. Now, these 11 men, they might have their reservations about their elderly king going into battle with them, but to show them how very important it is that he kill the dragon, Beowulf tells them the story of King Hrethel, who had been the father of the previous king of Geatland, Hygelac. And he tells the men that Hrethel lost his mind because he was unable to get vengeance for his son's death. The reason being that his son was slain accidentally by his other son, so by his brother. And this tells us, once again, like we heard earlier, that revenge was incredibly important in Anglo-Saxon society. It was a cultural expectation that if someone killed one of your family members, you were obligated to return that favour by getting the vengeance that you are legally entitled to. And to avoid getting that vengeance, or to not get that vengeance, was seen as a weakness. So Beowulf has told that story to explain to his men why it has to be him to be the one to kill the dragon, to get vengeance for his people. And it reasserts this cultural idea that vengeance is not only important in Anglo-Saxon society for honour, but because you will literally die of heartache and lose your mind if you are unable to get that vengeance that's owed to you. Why does Beowulf want to fight the dragon alone? Why is it important that Beowulf and the dragon slay each other? So, when Beowulf and his men approach the dragon's lair, he gives them a direct order to remain outside and to see who emerges, him or the dragon. So Beowulf then enters the dragon's lair alone, and he calls out to the dragon. He's not a coward, he's not going to sneak in. He calls out to the dragon and the battle commences almost immediately. So Beowulf and the dragon are both ferocious, we know that, and yet at the same time they're afraid of each other. And that tells us how strong each of them are. It tells us that they're each other's equals, the fact that this crazy strong dragon and this big strong man are both afraid of each other. And Beowulf stands his ground as the dragon charges at him. And he holds up his shield, but it's not quite as strong as he wishes, and it burns him. And the dragon approaches again, and Beowulf swings up at him with his sword, but it barely cuts through the dragon's really, really tough flesh. And they clash again, and the dragon surrounds the king in flames. And it looks as if this is Beowulf's time. Beowulf's time is up. But suddenly, I know I gave you this spoiler earlier, but suddenly young Wiglaf, one of these 11 brave men that Beowulf had brought with him, he enters the lair. Seeing his king surrounded by flames, he charges into battle. And the dragon sees him, and as the dragon turns to go and kill Wiglaf, Wiglaf shouts to Beowulf, "Be brave like you were in your youth." He urges him to defend himself, and with Wiglaf by his side, Beowulf gets some of his energy back. And now the dragon, it roars towards Wiglaf, burning his shield and his armour away, but Beowulf is there now and he's able to shield himself behind Beowulf. So Beowulf has been spurred to action by the thoughts of glory that Wiglaf has now inspired in him. So Beowulf now drives his sword into the dragon's head, but the short sword shatters because Beowulf is just so dang strong. And at the same time, unfortunately, the dragon had lunged forward and bit Beowulf on the neck. And it's at this moment that Wiglaf reveals even more bravery, because although he's been badly burned by the dragon, he then drives his blade into the dragon's stomach. Now, Beowulf is suffering terribly. The dragon's poison is rushing through him, but he pulls out a dagger and he delivers the final death blow to the dragon, and that's in the dragon's side. So this is the final act, though, the third and final act of heroism that Beowulf will ever perform. So Beowulf, he then walks outside and he tells Wiglaf to give the dragon's treasure to his people and to build him a mound on his funeral pyre called Beowulf's Barrow. He then takes off his helmet, his breastplate, his ring, and he gives them to Wiglaf, telling him, "Wiglaf, you are the last of my family, and in the absence of any children, you will take my crown now." And it is at that point that Beowulf dies and presumably has now gone to Valhalla. Now, although Wiglaf disobeyed Beowulf's orders, this isn't presented as a bad thing. So, why do you think a new hero is introduced at this stage of the story? How does Wiglaf demonstrate his loyalty to Beowulf? Well, Wiglaf is a warrior who has a strong sense of courage and honour, and although we know he's disobeyed a direct order from his king, the fact that he has acted in this way to save his king indicates his own leadership, that he has got leadership qualities. He is with Beowulf until the very, very end by his side. And when the king gives him his armour, he's indicating that, you, Wiglaf, are my successor. You might not be my son, but you are my successor. And most importantly, one thing I haven't gone over is that Wiglaf gives the other 10 warriors who were with them, he gives them a massive telling off for being cowards and running away at a time when their king most needed them. Now, the ending of Beowulf is quite complex. Although Beowulf has told Wiglaf to give the treasure to his people, this is going to be an order that Wiglaf refuses to do. Instead, he buries it with Beowulf himself on his mound, which will become Beowulf's barrow. And not only that, but Beowulf's people are kind of all in a deep state of shock and mourning because they recognise that they have emerged from 50 years of peace, because no other country was brave enough to actually fight Beowulf. And so the story ends on kind of a low note, with Beowulf's people, the Geats, well aware that they are now likely to be attacked by surrounding kingdoms. So, my final questions for you to think about are as follows. What do you make of the ending of Beowulf? Is this what you would expect for a hero's ending? Right, are there any other books or periods of history you would like to study? If so, let me know in the comments. Until the next video, stay cute, be kind, and please subscribe.